Good to go. Right, so we're going to kick off with our agenda again. So we had a bit of a shift around. So I hope you've all had coffee and all refreshed. So our next speaker is Oscar White. So Oscar will do a little bit of an introduction himself, but he's got a background in strategy and commercial business and strategy, which he's got his master's in. He then went to work for Accenture, which you all know as a leading consultant, and he has been the Brexit lead for large companies. Are we allowed to say the name of them in here off the record? No, we can't say. So it's all very commercial, but very large businesses. He's done a consulting Brexit lead project work there. He's recently joined the OIA with a completely separate hat on. So he's here in his suit looking very Accenture-like and very professional. But he also now works in industry and looks as tatty as the rest of us. So he's set up a small, soon-to-be big online business called Beyonk, which brings together outdoor activities and providers with young millennial consumers that are interested in looking at it, because our industry is way behind. So think booking.com for outdoors. So it's a fascinating, exciting new business, of which I am a small investor. So I have to admit that up front with my commercial hat on separately. Hans Falkenberg, you may remember and know. Hans is also working with Oscar. So it's quite an exciting young digital company, which I hope will help transform what we're doing as an industry separately. But he's here with his Accenture hat on, and so I'm going to introduce him now, and thank you, Lev. Oscar.
Does this work? There we go. Yes, hi, thank you all. I really liked how Mark kicked off when he said, this is what I know and what I don't know. So to get the caveats out of the way, I've been involved with Brexit since June 2016. I, as Andrew mentioned, left that role 6 months ago. And so what I know with Brexit is limited to my experience working with many companies cross-industry, but most of all, I took a leadership position in a Brexit program for a leading UK bank that has 45,000 staff, and we had 300 people looking at Brexit. So this is kind of like what you could view to be kind of the worst case scenario for Brexit planning. As part of my role in Brexit, I published research on the impacts cross-industry, and what I found to be interesting was how vast the impacts are cross-industry, but not also cross-industry, but also to specific companies as well. So I think it'd be good to talk about that today as well. As Andrew mentioned, since moved on from Brexit 6 months ago, partly because of Brexit fatigue and partly because I saw light at the end of the tunnel with something else. And now we provide a booking platform for activities, but also software for activity providers to make it easier to sell activities online. So looking back 6 months ago, I think we're all feeling a sense of Brexit fatigue in this room. I most certainly am. But I also think Brexit has been a very exciting time to be in business. This is where you'll throw tomatoes at me off the stage. But exciting given that the complete lack of certainty has been absolutely overwhelming. From one perspective, Boris Johnson saying the odds of against a no deal are 1,000,000 to 1, and then a month later him saying, well, actually, it's very touch and go. So literally nothing, providing nothing for us to go by. And on the other side of it, it's being very dramatic with the likes of the European Commission saying it's almost as significant as a natural disaster having a no-deal Brexit, and that we might look at using our funds for tornadoes and volcanoes and earthquakes if a no-deal comes along. So it's all very dramatic and very uncertain, and for an outsider like me at the time, I was very excited by it. I now get to the point where I'm like, okay, can we just move on and get something done? And I've got the perspective that if we spent this much time on something like global warming or climate change, would probably be, a much more valuable society than what we're really focusing on. But hey, we talk about that over a beer or something. So rather than me giving, I'll give a little bit of thoughts on what clients have been doing across different industries and where they've got to. But what I think would be most valuable, as we mentioned at the start, is breaking up into some groups later on and sharing opinions and thoughts. And I know some people have got some very strong Brexit plans in place, and they've done the sensitivity analysis, they've looked at tariffs, they've looked at all these different factors. So it'd be good to get people in groups to talk about how their businesses are looking at it, and thinking about the ecosystem in terms of how your suppliers are looking at it, how your customers are looking at it, and so on. So we'll do that in a minute. So just to give you some context of the piece of work I was working on, in the banking situation, UK banks had the issue that if they didn't have a European license, they were unable to simply transact with clients in Europe for certain products. Now, to get a license in any financial scenario is an absolute mammoth of a task. It requires literally setting up a bank from scratch. So we set up 2 banks in Europe. We hired 300 people again to staff the banks. We set up people, process technology, looked at governance frameworks, were heavily scrutinized by government and by regulators. And so that was kind of the worst case kind of program that you can really get in Brexit, in literally having to completely radically change your business in just to cover yourself in a no-deal scenario. And when Brexit came about and the vote happened, most businesses were looking at how do we plan? There are so many scenarios in which could turn out, and so do we plan for the fact that trade deals could be fine, or is there a spectrum in which we plan for? Some organisations left it very, very late and haven't got many plans in place, and that's fine for some. So it's always been almost viewed as an insurance policy. So looking at what a worst case outcome could be, looking at the impact to your business, and therefore trying to understand how much cost should we put against this, how much investment should we put against this to mitigate our risks, has really been kind of the key kind of consistent thought process throughout many organizations. What really strikes me is how different industries are impacted so differently. So from the automotive industry, where in the UK, average car is made up of 30,000 components, yet 50% of those 30,000 components are sourced from Europe. So imagine trying to understand your inventory landscape and the supply chain behind those 15,000 components and trying to understand how different tariffs impact that. So the automotive industry, and particularly UK car manufacturers, have had a really tough time. Then on the flip side of that, you've got the aviation industry, whereby, as we all know, certain UK airlines were told simply you will not be able to do some European routes unless you can prove your airline is owned a majority ownership by European citizens. So them having to look at different shareholding arrangements and completely restructuring their corporate entity is again another radical change. Fortunately, in this room today, I think this impact has been a little bit less impacted, although I don't want to speculate on that. So I think it's really interesting to see that different industries are impacted really differently. And then again, at the company level, I hope what we'll all discover as we talk to each other is that actually at a corporation level, it's also very different as well. As Andrew mentioned in my latest venture, our business is predominantly UK focused. And so for us, I see Brexit as potentially an opportunity. Again, tomatoes are going to be thrown at me. But for us, the fact that the pound could drop in value, people could fly out to Europe a little less, could focus more on staycations, that could potentially benefit us. I know we've got Kurt Jansen from the Tourism Alliance talking a little bit later about the implications for tourism. And whereas other companies, of course, are going to see this as a massive risk and a massive threat. So what I propose we do is we're going to break up into groups, 6 groups, and what we're going to do is a little bit of a competition, and we're going to split up in 6 groups, and I want to go for a brainstorming session. So we've only got around 10 minutes, and what we're going to do is for each post-it note, put down an impact, whether that be an opportunity or a threat associated with Brexit. So there's going to get a point per impact, but also, more importantly, this is about structure, because it's very quickly to write down a ton of different impacts, but actually, if I'm putting my strategy cap on, there are a number of ways in which we can really build out a really solid, what the consultants like to call MECE framework, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, meaning you get every single possible impact in a nice framework. So ways that we could be looking at the impacts to our organizations could be anything from the corporate structure we have, so HR, finance, implications to marketing and sales, our finance department, whether we need to look at cash flow. So there's one way of looking at it that way. There's another way of looking at it from an industry perspective. They call it the PESTLE framework. Political, economical, societal, or technological, legal, and economical. So like another way to look at what the impacts could be. So there's a number of ways in which we can look at it. The other thing is there are a number of scenarios in which we can also plan for. So when we go through this exercise of trying to understand the different impacts of Brexit, do we look at a no-deal scenario right now, given, we could argue that we're moving away from a no-deal and it's becoming less likely, or do we look at the fact that we've still got, even under Boris Johnson's arrangement, we've still got another 14 months of transition where we haven't got our trade agreements in place. What could they potentially look like? So there's a number of scenarios we need to plan for as well. So that's something to keep in mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up into 6 groups. We've got 3 flip charts there. We've got 1 outside there, and we've got a bunch of post-it notes as well. And we've got some single-use plastic pens, so thank you for that. And so what we're going to do is 1 impact per post-it note, brainstorm, and then we're going to come back together. We're going to present back on what we think. And the whole purpose of this really is to get everyone meeting new people, what we call mandated fun, although you might not think it, and also to try and get other people's perspectives and to hear from some of the experts in the room that have large organizations and have gone through this stringent planning process. So let's go, stand up.
Split them fairly simply?
Yeah, so 3 over there, 1 outside, 2 here. What I'm hoping we gathered from that exercise is that this is, and Mark alluded to this earlier, that this is very much a massive, complex ecosystem, and what your suppliers are facing and what your customers are facing should also be thought about within your plans. The other thing is that one of the biggest threats that it looked like everyone was discussing in the room was that actually just the lack of certainty was one of the biggest threats. What that means in terms of not getting investment in time, not understanding what our specific plans should be, that's one of our biggest threats. And then also it was good to see that although everyone seemed to start off with the threats, it started to move towards, well, actually there could be some opportunities here as well. So that was good to see. So there's 2 more exercises. I'll tell you what the next one is. This one, they're both meant to be very, very quick. So the next exercise is, oh, well, this is my one. I'm not going to show you because you've all put mine to absolute shame. But I'll do a quick one. So one of my thought processes was, from an economical perspective, if we just take one fragment of, the whole piece, economically, the value of the pound could decrease. Now, that's a massive opportunity for some people. Obviously, if you're selling to Europe, your products will be cheaper. But likewise, if you're sourcing goods from Europe, then your cost of goods are going to be increased. So obviously, what we should have seen around the room is some people's opportunities should have been other people's threats. I'm not sure if anyone got to that point. And then the other thing is, well, could interest rates be cut, and therefore could it encourage more consumer spending, even though we've said that consumer confidence could be knocked? So that's the other thing, and therefore sales could increase. I know there's a couple of people in the room that actually said because their customers had been stockpiling goods, they've already had a shoot in sales because they've had that demand locked in for the next year, which has been great. So some people have already seen opportunities as well. So the next exercise is what we're going to do is go through really, really quickly and prioritize of each of the things we've got down on our boards, what are the biggest threats and the biggest opportunities. And so what we should have is kind of a vertical order of what we see to be the biggest impacts to our organizations. And again, if you're in different companies and organizations, there should be a bit of controversy on which ones should impact you. And likewise, again, it depends on the scenarios that play out. Obviously, if there's a no deal, certain impacts could be much more significant, but it's all about trying to get people's different perspectives. So let's go back again and prioritize the order of the impacts we've got on our boards and get them in a long list if there's enough space. Thank you. 5 minutes.
I think that was the idea. Supply chain.
Okay, so what that should have shown really is that it's very subjective on which ones are higher impact. And what we've done with clients is to actually go through what Andrew alluded to earlier, into actually looking at what WTO tariffs could look like, understanding what implications those would have to our balance sheet and our cash flow forecasts, and likewise understanding how much the value of the pound could decrease and therefore what implications that would have. So the whole point is really, if we were going to do this properly, we would do some sensitivity analysis, understand each of the levers, and therefore come up with an objective, or at least a more objective view on how impactful these factors would be to our organizations. That being said, I hope it was particularly at least a little bit useful. So the final thing is, obviously, what we're going to talk about next is what protections will we put in place to mitigate these risks. Now, some of these are obviously very straightforward. If the pound is going to be devalued, then we're going to look at currency hedging. I won't go into that because, one, we don't have time, but also, if anyone does have any questions on currency hedging, Andrew's provided the contact, but you can also speak to your bank managers. But there's also opportunities in there and ways to be creative. So one could argue that if the pound is going to devalue, maybe we could set up an automated marketing tool where we automatically market to markets that where the pound is less value, and therefore we've got more chance of being competitive. You know that. So there are many ways in which we can react. So let's try and split up again and try and think about really quickly, 5 minutes, put some post-it notes against the other post-it notes you've got on what the plans would be to mitigate the risks or take advantage of the opportunities. So on your marks, set, go. Okay, thank you. Let's wrap up very quickly. So hopefully that was a useful session. Obviously, there's a huge amount of content to cover, and it's not realistic to do it properly and do it justice. But what I would say is hopefully this is, if there are any concerns around current plans that you have in place, potentially an exercise that you take back to your organizations and think through it again. Hopefully you've picked up some different perspectives. Hopefully you can walk around during lunch and look at other people's boards and see what they're really thinking about. I'll hand it over to Andrew, but I think it's just lunch, isn't it?
Yep. I'm on this one. Thanks. We will see Oscar again later, but a big round of applause for Oscar. Yeah, thank you. So where we're up to is in a minute we're going to break for lunch. We're told lunch is sort of a walk-in buffet sort of affair, so we're told you can bring it in here as well as out there. So I think it's well worth, in the sort of 45 minutes we've got, just scouting everybody else's boards and having a little look and thinking, oh, holy crap, I never thought of that threat, or, oh, that's an exciting opportunity. And also just nominate a spokesman, because at the back end of the day, we were going to do it now, we run out a bit of time and when the lunch is hot, we're going to get somebody from each group just to stand up and say, 3 opportunities or 3 priorities, or just a little bit of feedback within a session Oscar's running later. So nominate a leader and just give some thought to a few of your key opportunities and key threats, and then do share other people's. And if you think, oh my God, one of theirs is better than mine, you can do that as well. Oscar's going to do a little bit of a roundup
Yes.
and going to finish with the groups and some of the feedback you gave from earlier.
So I can't just go straight on to Brexit after that, because I'm here as well because I'm infinitely passionate about the outdoors. Personal story of my own is my dad is suffering from cancer and is in the kind of difficult stages of it. And I've recently, in the last 3 months, got him on the Couch to 5K program. I don't know if you've heard of that. But his health now has drastically changed. He's drinking less alcohol. He is becoming fitter. But most of all, what's been alluded to today is the impact to his mental health and his whole perspective on, right, I'm actually going to fight cancer now rather than, I'm completely useless, I've got no hope. And so I completely get, policy opportunities, the opportunities that it can bring to people's health and society. So I think realistically, if we all spent as much time on, Brexit as actually something as what I view as much more important to the outdoors, then I think we'd all be a lot better off. But there's my my leeway into Brexit. So
he's also, I should just say, in terms of his outdoor credentials, he's the world record holder for running a marathon dressed in a tent.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason for that. As Andrew said as well, there's a stat where 75% of kids spend less time outdoors than prison inmates. And I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. So I wanted to raise awareness of that. And so I ended up doing the London Marathon and I did a UK-wide running tour in cities dressed in a tent. It was ridiculous. I looked stupid. I almost passed out multiple occasions because it was so hot. But I got famous for 2 weeks. I was on BBC News. I was on The One Show. I was everywhere. Does anyone in the room recognise Tent Man?
Yeah.
Someone?
15 minutes of fame.
Autographs later. So yeah. Anyway, so on to other topics. So Brexit. What would be really great, I'm not sure if anyone's done this, but I think it'd be really good if we go around the room, one person from each group, give us 30 seconds on the 2 top threats and the top opportunity you've got. And it'll be interesting to see if that translates across everyone in the room, if everyone's got the same kind of view. Because obviously Kurt earlier stood up and said that tourism was around, one of them was employees, and so he's already done that exercise, so it would be useful to see in this room if we've all got a kind of consensus of opinion of the biggest impacts, both threats and opportunities. So, shall I start off? Who is the designated speaker for this board? If there isn't one, is anyone willing to come up and give us a quick 30 seconds? Can you just give us 30 seconds, top 2 threats, top opportunity? Was it a challenging discussion? Any insights you gained?
It was challenging, and it's even more challenging now that Lucy is not here anymore, because she arranged all this from threat to opportunity. So I'm just going to do it from the top of my head as far as I remember the talks that we had.
We'll start in the middle, that's the ones there.
Yeah? The ones in the middle, okay, that's what
30
I thought.
seconds are up.
Okay, that's it. Decision delays, that was top threat, because it just makes everything incredibly difficult for everybody. Even if it's not good, if you know it, you can deal with it, and therefore that was the worst. And the biggest opportunity was, dear God, was it? I think it was tourism income, additional tourism income, with unfortunately a drop in the pound. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, let's go. Next one.
So if you give a policy person the opportunity to do this, this is what they'll do. So I'm going to answer it and then say, but. So opportunities. I think we were pretty balanced in this group, actually, between threats and opportunities. We definitely started more on the threats and moved to the more positive side. The 2 biggest opportunities are around staff. So an opportunity for staff to have their wages increased, but also an opportunity for smaller, independent, niche and specialist companies. So that was the opportunity, but clearly there's a flip side to that around increased cost. The threats, the 2 biggest that we had, first of all, tariffs and customs changes, both direct cost and uncertainty around that. And then currency fluctuations, which kind of sat in the middle and ended up in threats. Clearly, it depends on your balance of import-export, but again, the uncertainty around that, I think, is significant. Where we had an echo with the other group is a big worry around delays, so both logistical delays, delays at the port and point of entry, and again, just uncertainty and the potential of being stuck in the queue. My personal view, and having worked in similar policy before, is it's not actually what happens that's the problem, it's the chilling effect of people not bothering to invest because they think that might happen. And I suspect that's probably going to be more of an issue. I think we'll get over the delays relatively quickly, but I think it's the fear of getting stuck in that queue that will actually stop a lot of investment. Is that a reasonable summary, my group? Thank you.
Not 30 seconds, but okay. So this board here, 30 seconds challenge.
So with our guys, we had the threats kind of middle ground that actually could go either way, which seems to be a hell of a lot of things, and then the opportunities. So threats, you can see there's loads, but actually most of them were revolving around cash flow. So it was like the tariffs, the VAT, just the actual cost of supply one way or the other. But predominantly it was cash flow in one form or another. And then the, I guess, biggest opportunities was just more sort of people staying in the UK and holidaying in and around the UK.
Very nice. We're seeing some trends come about, aren't we, with the potential uplift of staycations and tourism and the threat of border crossings and currency risks.
It's interesting that while whoever that person's getting ready, that, I mean, there must be some Brexit, 52% of the bloody country voted for this effing thing. Where are the people that think it's a good idea, and what are those opportunities? Fascinating free trade agreements, Britain will be cast off, no red tape, no £350 million a week, someone give me one of the good things.
No comment.
Tourism.
Right, over to Martin.
Martin.
Right, I have to remember what we talked about. We had really mixed bunch, but we've split this. We started with the opportunities. So there was definite positive export opportunities that came from the group. We also put confusion. Sounds a bit of a negative, but it was a positive in how it's thrown things around. Just because people have to analyse what they're doing and go forward with it. Because from that, and it's again, we've had with ourselves, we've had erratic ordering, people concerned about what's going on, but it's increased business from the last time when we spoke in March, bizarrely. Mm-hmm. And then we started looking at the negatives. Some of the main ones were the supply chain logistics, people basically not sure if they're going to get anything. And as we've discussed before about investment, people sort of sit on the fence and aren't sure where they're going to go. And then we put some other ones down the side, and to be quite honest, I can't remember why we did these. They're the plans, aren't they? Yeah, they're sort of the plans as well, so.
Good. So I think that answers your question, Andrew. Some positives here.
Definitely some positives, got one.
Erratic ordering, people wanting to stockpile and get hold of their goods sooner.
Richard is my flip chart. Okay, so positives for us was encouragement of insourcing, so UK manufacturing, whereas a lot of companies might at the moment go to the Far East or Europe. Companies might be investigating UK manufacturing, and that might have an impact on that. And the tourism one, again, was ours. And then negatives, so quite a few people in our group are chemicals manufacturers or involved with chemicals, and the picture is not clear at all for us. Our business particularly, we've got a very busy kind of first quarter retail pre-order season about to start, and we have labels where we don't know what's got to be on them, license numbers that may change, and we've got really very little guidance, so that's a massive risk. And supply chain was our other negative.
Complete lack of certainty in some areas, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good, thank you. I think is that all of them?
Last one.
Oh, last one. Who is the designated speaker? And the post-its have fallen off.
Anyone for this one?
I am. Most of the things have been mentioned, I think. So I think one of the things that hasn't yet is that that macroeconomic factor of
the general economy being subdued and people buying less, having the knock-on to all of our businesses, but equally the challenges of currency, which we've all suffered over the last few years, and the margin management, that continuing is obviously a big thing. Logistics, border delays, all those administration costs, but also, again, the positive, the potential for growth in our businesses through people staying here and people coming from the continent.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Scott.
So I think quite clear there were some general themes throughout. Supply chain, complications, currency issues, but also opportunities for increased exports and currency fluctuations and so on. What I was hoping to get from this exercise is a high-level view on some thought processes we can go through when it comes to planning. What I really liked what Dan Peck said earlier was that Brexit is a process and not an event, and things like today coming up with Boris Johnson and his latest political movements, it's so easy to constantly speculate and get confused and worry the workforce on what is and what isn't happening. And so I really liked Dan Peck's breakdown of like the worst case is a no deal. Let's plan for that. The next step after that is an order, is an agreement on the table. Let's plan for that. And therefore, when something happens, when an event happens, we then proactively implement our plan. And so every day we're not having to worry, we simply monitor on the side of our desks and we enforce our plans when we need to. And this exercise is very much a kind of a bit of fun, a bit or mandated fun, but also to try and spark the thought process in the way that we would go and analyze it. Obviously, realistically, we would have to go and do sensitivity analysis. We would look at the parameters in which we're operating, such as in a no-deal scenario, what do WTO tariffs look like? What are the implications for our supply chain? So there's been a lot of information here today that I hope provides some sort of insight into plans to bolster what we're currently thinking about. But I do think, and I'm sorry for this, and I think Brexit is going to continue for a very long time. We're going to, no doubt, have even more fatigue from it. And so I think realistically, having a proactive plan in place that is sparked based on a number of events is the best way that we can manage our fatigue and try and avoid kind of constant speculation. So thank you very much for today. I hope it wasn't too awkward coming up with random ideas, but hope you enjoyed it somewhat. So handing it back over to Andrew. Thank you.
Brilliant. Oscar's around as well. So that's going to really bring us to a pause, shall we say. So in which case, thank you very much, everybody else. Have a fun Brexit, and I shall see you around at the trade shows, and thank you very much for coming today. Cheers.